Off with the first question, just 'cause it's something I often get asked about. So while you're here, Adrian, people always ask us about harvest. Well, both of you actually, about harvest dates, and how do you need to choose your mixtures for that, or also is there a kind of convergence of the ripening dates when you grow crops together?
You implied the answer in the last thing you said, but that certainly applies to if you're just growing, say, different varieties of, say, of wheat or barley or something like that. When it comes to trying to mix peas and cereals, for example, I actually for the first time took winter peas and winter barley to harvest this year. And I had 3 different varieties of winter peas. You have to get them from other countries. They don't seem to be possible to source them here. 2 of the varieties ripened nicely at the same time as winter barley. The other one was going to be still green at Christmas, I reckon. So, yes, you do have to make some choices there. There is some convergence. You can push it to a certain distance, but yes, you do actually have to take note of that as well. Yeah. Presumably competition. Just the same as when you grow a very tall and a short type, you tend to get the short type a bit taller and tall type a bit shorter and things like that. So it's a matter of how they interact with the environment and each other.
Pretty similar to what Adrian said. You do have to be careful. So we try and use an early variety of oilseed rape and a later variety of peas, so they're not too different. But we do find that there is convergence, but don't push your luck, don't have maize and something, and you do have to plan.
Great, okay, we've got any questions in the audience? Yeah, we'll go there, I saw you first.
So how do you separate the, oilseed rape and peas, or, when you've harvested them? Or don't you?
We do. It's a question that I spent quite a long time trying to answer, but in the last 2 years ago I bought a rotary cleaner second-hand, and our winter project last year was putting that up on a platform and making a system to separate our crops. It seems to work fairly well, but I also use it for seed. I can use it for cleaning oats out if they're not up to bushel weight, etc. So it's a multi-purpose thing, but it's something you have to think about, and if you don't have on-farm facilities, you have to be careful, and definitely be careful of what you grow. Like I said, linseed and oats didn't separate very well. So the bigger the difference in weight and shape is just as important as size, it makes a difference. So the peas and the oilseed rape separated easily, very big difference. The winter beans and the spring beans and spring oats, you get a little fraction in them. You might get a few small beans in with the spring oats. You can always get one fraction clean, one fraction you've got to be maybe a bit careful for.
Shall I just make another comment on that? It was where we do some of the work is on a farm owned by Doug Christie in the south of Fife, and he had again a similar sort of rotary cleaner there. I know last year he managed to grow peas and barley and sell the barley at malting quality. So he did manage to successfully separate that and putting minimal, if any, nitrogen on, incidentally. The only problem he did get is with split peas. They are hard to separate out from the barley. So if you get that problem, you may have an issue there. I think there are a lot of new potential equipment which use optical means and air jets and all sorts of things. They're all fairly expensive, but I wonder if that's an area where technology may develop, where we could get something which is practical on farm. I don't know, it's something we're looking into at the moment.
The ultimate cleaner that we use is a combine, and I think there's another project, the Remix project, and they're working on a combine with separate combine tanks. So ultimately the best way will be to have a combine which separates it yourself. But it's not here yet.
Yeah, also within the field lab, so James Hare's with the wheat and beans, that was going as an animal feed, and the Carlin peas and the triticale, Mark did separate that on-farm just with an on-farm cleaner. He did have a problem with split peas, but he was able to keep them with the triticale for on-farm feed. but was able to get it separated enough for Hobmedod. So, and I will also say that within France, the partners in France, there is separation that's done by grain buyers. So looking at these technologies, looking at these kind of hubs, I think there's potential there as well. Yeah.
Steve Newman, Biodiversity International Limited. Thought those talks were absolutely fantastic. Maybe a missed opportunity, I don't know. I was wondering why none of the presenters showed the land equivalent ratio for the systems, which is a measure of the land saving ability, and whether any of you thought of augmenting that approach by counting ghost acres. Because when we're looking at the amount of fertiliser or whatever, ghost acres would be a very interesting approach. So a ghost acre is, so you would look at the energy cost of production of nitrate and then translate that into fossil photosynthesis. So you would get the area cost of fertiliser or a pesticide, and you can look at the yield per unit acre on the land, and then also you include ghost acres. But the land equivalent ratio is normally the main currency, the way that people share agroforestry, mixed cropping, intercropping information worldwide.
I agree that, there's probably quite a lot of different ways you can look at this sort of thing. It's not something I've really done much with. Land equivalent ratio is the basic thing that, as you say, lots of people compare. That's the reason why we've only done that so far. But yeah, you can look at a whole load of different things, and any time we present these results, we get that sort of response. Yes, I think we should look at this sort of thing. And in the Diversify project, we had a review meeting with the EU only in December, and that's exactly the sort of point they brought up. So yes, we are going to be looking at that sort of thing in particular. Yep.
From my Nuffield, there was a meta-analysis done of intercropping worldwide, and they found the average LER was 1.3, and farmers were 30% economically better off. On our farm, it's been about 1.2 so far. Obviously, this year, not a benefit of LER. But in terms of the ghost acres, from what I understand you're getting at, on our spring peas and spring oilseed rape mixture, we don't put any fertiliser or any inputs on. And we did a tissue test on the spring oilseed rape, and found that majority of the nutrients within there were at sufficient levels. And normally spring oilseed rape commercially would need 160 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. This was showing it had no need for nitrogen. So the synergy between the two, which is complex, and it's not necessarily, the peas aren't necessarily giving lots of nitrogen to the oilseed rape, but we were finding that we get a lot less disease, a lot less need for fertility by mixing crops.
So for me, one of the most exciting things about land equivalent ratio is it's leading to a predictive science about ecological combining ability. Early on in the intercropping work, there was a hypothesis developed by Bob Willey that showed that LER was proportional to the dissimilarity of the components. And he measured it in terms of the maturation time and stature. So he showed very clearly within crops of the semi-arid tropics, there was a relationship between the size of the yield advantage and the height difference and the season difference. So that's very powerful in trying to maximise appropriate use of niche space and also looking at optimising yield. So I think there's lots of benefits from that.
There's also the next level. The one guy I saw in Canada was doing it. He was variable rate seeding his intercrops. So he had noticed in part of his fields, the lower parts would yield better peas than would oilseed rape. So he put more peas in oilseed rape, and the higher parts would be the other way around. So he was doing precision technology varying across the field, which is similar to what you're implying.
And it's information on things like that, which we're trying to put together in the Diversify projects by having a lot of different trials and different sites with different varieties appropriate to the local area and things like this. Another thing that just occurs to me is, of course, how do you value all, say, the legacy effects on what you've done to soil structure, soil fertility, and all these other external or internal, really, benefits to future crops and other things like this. To value those, I think, is really important.
Question down the front here.
Hello. Yes, I was very interested in your linseed. I grow about 120 acres of linseed every year and follow it through, press it and mill it and sell it directly to people. This year, of course, it was pretty disastrous, whether it was the organic or the conventional. And you said you put lentils with it, I think. And how on earth did you separate that out?
I did. Sorry, go on.
My other question was, we're putting about 60 acres of spring barley in this year, and I wondered, as I'm new to doing this, should I try to put something else with that, and if so, what would you suggest?
In terms of the linseed with a companion for the lentils, to hold the lentils up and for weed control, the linseed by itself I'm going to put oats with for the flea beetle, where you could control suppression and reduction. Spring barley, I don't put anything with my spring barley. I think I would use spring barley as a companion for peas rather than peas as a companion for spring barley. Spring barley is very competitive. I think Martin Wolf, who's around as well, has done work on it, and you see a lot better, more benefits from a lower proportion of barley with peas rather than a few peas with barley. But Adrian might be able to comment, or Charlotte. No comment. Yeah.
I guess the important thing as well is always to think, what is your objective with a mixture? So that's in terms of thinking about the ratios and, that you're clear what it is you want to achieve with mixing the crops, and which would you always say to have a priority crop?
Yeah, normally.
Yeah. And then obviously what you're going to do at the end of it as well. We've got any more questions? Got any? Yeah.
It's slightly off topic. As a field-scale vegetable grower, the only way that we can really intercrop at the moment is through an undersowing of relay green manure or weeds, essentially. In your travels or as a researcher, do you think you know of any kind of novel, say, vegetable crops that you'd think would be able to be intercropped efficiently, or have seen any in experience?
Good question. Do we have any experience with horticulture systems? Has there been much research in horticulture, companion cropping, intercropping?
The first book I bought on companion cropping was gardening. There's a lot of companion charts for gardening, so that's a good start for a guide of what will or won't go together. A lot of things hate onions. Onions don't go very well with lots of things. But practical, I didn't actually look at horticulture. The only person I know of doing potatoes with companion cropping is a guy called Brendan Rocky in Colorado. But for horticulture, I think you've almost got to go back to your gardening books and try and scale it up.
I'm also interested in the same question, and it's sort of like whether these techniques will work on a sort of like a allotment kind of scale.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have. I'm not sure there is a huge amount of work going on.
Can I just respond? There's a heck of a lot of research on vegetable intercropping. The early trials done at Reading on carrot and onion were incredibly exciting, very large land equivalent ratios. There was also a lot of work at Wellesbourne looking at the pest aspects of trying to reduce pests of brassicas, diamond head moth and cabbage white through intercropping. So if you... One of the biggest problems actually that's not come up at this conference is it's very difficult for the citizen to access the literature. I mean, I'm a professor at Leeds University, so I have a thing called an Athens password, and I can search cab abstracts and look for carrot and onion, and it's just phenomenal what's there. But I'm afraid a citizen is not allowed that privilege, and I think we must try and address that as a real farming movement.
Yeah, totally agree with you, and that's very much what we're trying to do with Agricology, so we should talk more, and yeah, it would be great to get more of that out there, and synthesize some of that research. We are building an intercropping hub on the website that will bring together research, but yeah, we've got a long way to go to lots of potential there. So do share things if you know of anything that you think would be relevant. And in the next session, we will be talking about this more. So if you have got experience with intercropping in horticulture systems, then do share that there as well. Question over there. Oh, what have we got?
So on that point, I've found in my Nuffield exactly what you said. There's a huge amount of information out there. And when I sort of looked into it, I didn't realise that the scientists normally have to pay to put their stuff into journals. So if you find something, an abstract, interesting, just email the scientists. And I found they send you their journal. Because, you know, the scientists themselves are happy to share their work because to them there's no financial gain of being in a journal.
You cannot then share it with, like, put it on a website or something like that, because it is still copyrighted in the journal.
You can read it yourself, surely, can't you? Yeah.
One person should not open information.
There are some improvements in open access going on at the moment, which will improve the situation, but it doesn't apply to everything. And at the moment, the main publishers are largely still in control of everything.
Great. Yep. Question over there.
I just, maybe probably put just to Andy, but for the non-organic farmers in the room, because there are some, and also because it will deal with the question that gets asked, or the challenges we get about mixing crops and combining crops. What do you do about chemical control of weeds and stuff when you're mixed crops? I know you spring ones you don't, but winter cropping, for example, you mentioned blackgrass. It's the one thing that worries every conventional farmer. But from an organic point of view, we use competition. What do you do?
Choose my mixtures carefully, choose a field carefully. You're correct, most of my intercrops are spring. I see the most benefit coming from the spring ones because they're the ones that are most highly variable in yield, so you can level out that yield. There is certain mixtures you can use and still use herbicides. But yeah, there'd be certain fields I wouldn't at the moment be happy on putting an intercrop on because I'd make my weed issues worse. In the future, who knows what's coming in the future. I think the organics and the non-organics, people are converging in terms of weed control, and we'll end up in the same place. But yeah, it's an issue. But just planning is what I would say.
I think we do need more information on which are the weed competitive species. Even years ago, there was a WECOF EU project which identified some wheat varieties which were more weed competitive and things like this. I find that with winter, legume cereal combinations, where certainly our farm staff said, what herbicides can I use there? We went for none because I felt they'd be sufficiently competitive in early ground cover. We never had any weed problem at all. So I think it is about choice of the species you're putting together, and within the species, the varieties which will be weed competitive early on and things like that. But we don't have enough information on that at the moment. And one of the things, again, which will hopefully come out of the Diversify project is some more information on things like that.
Question down front here.
Another way of looking at mixing crops in with each other is not just different species, but different varieties. I don't know if anyone attended John Letz's talk, which was yesterday morning, where he was extolling the virtues of that with wheat and heritage wheat particularly. So I believe he's here actually. I can see him. Yeah. Just wondered what your views were on that. I mean, one of his fields he mentioned he put 500 different varieties of wheat in, of which only, I think, 100 came up or something. Am I right in saying, John?
It wasn't even a question, so I was just reacting. I started with 500, yes, but I think what's interesting here is that if you plant rye with wheat, that hugely increases the yield. I don't have all the figures that you have, but I have it in general practice. I mean, Anyway, it was your question. I'm just, there's at least 150 in my mixes.
Just on variety mixtures, I mean, I've been looking at variety mixtures. That was the early slides that I showed you on winter barley and spring barley. Variety mixtures, they nearly always give a yield benefit. Winter wheat as well. You do find that with a lot of the things now on the AHDB recommended list, they're incredibly similar. You've got very little in the way of traits which really complement each other, so some of the advantages are getting smaller all the time with a lot of the available varieties on recommended lists. So this is probably where we do need to bring in a lot of other varieties to bring in that complementarity of traits. So we've got some traits to actually complement each other. That is the situation we're in at the moment. So yeah, definitely there is huge potential for mixing varieties within species. Also, if you're having mixtures of even different cereal species, how many of us have actually tried mixed variety within each species in the overall mixture there as well? Again, there is potential, but we're rather lacking in the varieties readily available commercially, which of course you all know.
One word of caution I would say as a farmer, make sure the end market will accept it. Certain things in our spring oats, they only want a certain variety. So we do mix our wheat varieties in certain situations, but some people don't want mixed varieties.
The maltsters in particular hate the very thought of it, of not being able to control the market on single varieties. But wheat for distilling in Scotland, yep, that was no problem at all. We did that commercially. And winter barley for feed, no problem at all.
Yeah, but we are starting to see some changes. I don't know if anyone saw that the small food bakery talk this morning. There's a real movement with direct connections between millers, bakers, farmers, and I think there's potential there to open up for this kind of diversity that can move away from some of those restrictions. Have we got any more questions out there? Haven't had any from any women. Yeah, thanks, Lydia.
So on some work that I've been doing with mixed lays, which is not quite the same thing, I've made an interesting observation this year. So we planted a grass and clover mixture on the same field as a mixed species sward, which contained exactly the same clover species and varieties from the same source and obviously on the same site. And the clover came up, well, germinated and started to establish much slower in the grass sward than it did in the mixed sward. And I don't know whether you've made any observations along those lines. There was many other legumes in our mixed sward. So it's a kind of an observation come question. Any thoughts on that?
The only observation I have is, I guess that's nurse cropping, isn't it, really, where there's some things that encourage the establishment of other things. And there's a girl I saw in the south of France with her lucerne. She'd always mix it with, when she planted, she'd put peas, vetch, and something else in, and she got a lot better establishment with the lucerne and could sell the first cut of the mixture and then have lucerne for 3 or 4 years. I'd say it's, and maybe that's the issue we have with our spring oats, with our clover, is that the oats are highly competitive.
Great, okay, thank you. I think we'll draw the session to a close there. Just to say, as I have mentioned, on Agricology, we've got a library of resources on there, lots of things on, not as much as we'd like, but lots of things on intercropping, including Andy's Nuffield report, various different research papers, and we are opening up a research hub on there for intercropping and the field lab. We also have a YouTube channel, Twitter, follow us on Twitter at Agricology. You can ask your questions, share your experiences with other farmers. After this session, as I mentioned, in half an hour, so we're going to be next door having an informal discussion, bringing together these guys and from the Integrated Pest Management, Building Pest Resilience Systems, which we're having afterwards. Such as an opportunity for people to share ideas, experiences, things you've made work, ask your questions. So come and join us. But thank you very much, and thanks so much to our speakers. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you.